Okay, so I think we're gonna start with uh, talking some more about why we read. And I think, Richard, you weren't with us last time, were you?
No, no.
Do you want to start and maybe talk
Sure.
about your reading reasons?
Uh, I'd say 75% of why I read is for pure escapism. And even within that escapism, it's also to see what other authors are doing. I get an idea when I look at a book like everyone else. Sometimes I'll read if it's a physical book, the back cover or the inside, and say, or I'll just read a couple of reviews and say, well, that sounds interesting. So let me see how they handle that story. Or if it's the classics, again, it's just because sometimes I reread a lot. I've read books before, but it's to get, just to zone out everything else, to go back into that author's world of whatever it is. And sometimes if it's a favorite author, it's funny, you reread it, and I'm sure you've experienced it, you reread again and again, and each time you learn something or take away something else. And that's really beautiful. I love that feeling. I noticed something I did before, especially Jeeves and Wooster books. I mean, those are like, those you read, gosh, I did not get that the first time. And then I'd say the 25%, if I did my percentages right from what I said earlier, is actually, I don't want to call it research, but I'll be reading something or researching something, and I find that historical or scientific topic fascinating, and I put it in the back of my mind. And then when I'm going to do a little book shopping, yeah, I'll pick up something by Lee Smolin on cosmology, or whatever's going on in quantum physics, whatever, so I could understand it a little bit more, a little bit deeper, because it just piques my curiosity. So there's about 25% is nonfiction, 75% fiction, and within that, for fun and for just kind of seeing what authors do.
Okay. Audrey and Bertold, do all of us read nonfiction too, history or other kinds of nonfiction, or is it just fiction?
No, I read nonfiction, both sort of the way Richard does, with finding something that's interesting, or you hear something on the news, or maybe I'm researching something for either a blog post or whatever I'm writing, and if there happens to be a book that's about that, I'll read that too. And yeah, so, and I read about gardening and stuff like that. So, but I think nowadays I read more fiction than non, quite a bit. Like maybe, I don't know, 90% fiction, 10% nonfiction. It used to be more different in the past. This is like right now.
I used to read pretty much exclusively nonfiction. It was only in the last maybe 10 years or so that I got into reading fiction a lot too. But yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction as well.
Okay. I tend to read history, a lot of books on American history in particular, and things like that. Maybe a few other aspects. I remember when I was younger, I read a lot of autobiographies and biographies, and I generally stay entirely away from those these days because I just think whoever wrote it, whether it's an autobiography or biography, has an agenda, and you're not going to get the real picture of the person the book is about, because they either absolutely loved them, so you're going to get all the good things, or they didn't like them, and it seems to me that biographies are generally agenda driven rather than anything else. So did anybody look at the comments on the blog on this post? Anything jump out at you to respond to? I think, a lot of people read for escape. I think we've all identified that. I noticed that somebody, let me find it. Somebody commented that they read comfort reads at bedtime, and then they read information reads elsewhere. Does it matter where you are, what you read?
You mean like physically? Or
yes, what your environment is.
Oh yeah, yeah, I guess it would. I mean, you probably don't want to read something disturbing just before you go to sleep. So you might have your bedside comfort book or whatever. So yeah, I could see that. Or if you're reading something serious and you're, trying to learn something from it, you may be at your desk with something to make notes on. I mostly read either at the table with food or in bed. That's it. I don't tend to read much sort of while like on the couch, because somehow I don't use my couch much anymore. It has a kind of grubby couch cover on it because of the dog, and who wants to sit there, right? So we have a really big dog. So our living room has kind of become out of commission. Plus, I tend to be in the room with the computer when I'm not reading, like doing blog posts, reading or commenting or whatever. So yeah, the only thing I read here and at the computer is blog stuff. So yeah, those are the three spots: desk, bed, and table for me.
And you'll read anything regardless of which spot you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually have just one book going that I read. Sometimes two, but not as often.
That's another question. Do you guys read more than one book at a time?
Yes, I do. Not often, but yeah, every so often.
I prefer not to, but more and more I'm finding myself doing it. And I'm just because there's so many books. And it is true, if I'm doing that, I probably will. And I don't know that this was really conscious, but it's like I'll read one book when I'm in one place and the other book when I'm in another place. I don't know exactly how that came about, but yeah, I'll definitely do that.
That's I've found myself doing that a little bit a few years ago, but I've got back into the habit of I'm just one book at a time. I want to focus on what I'm reading on, and the only way I'll start something else is if, for some reason I'm somewhere and I don't have the book I'm reading and something else is available, then I'll do that. Um, I think I forgot to mention the one of the other critical reasons I read last time, and if I said this already, then let me know and I can stop. But I read so I can fall asleep. Did I mention that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when my wife and I started dating and we moved in with each other, and we would go out and we'd come home at 1 or 2 in the morning, and then we'd get ready for bed and I would lay down and read. And she's like, it's 2 in the morning. Why are you reading? Because it's the only way I know to slow my brain down and to be able to get into that sleep mode. And that's basically, and the number one reason I read before bed is so that I can shut everything else down so I can go to sleep.
But I guess it depends. I mean, you can't read just anything if you want to do that. I mean, if you read
I do.
Really?
Whatever book I'm on, that's what I'm reading.
Yeah. So even if it's a thriller or whatever.
You could do that with a Carrie Rubin book? Seriously?
Yeah. Sorry, Carrie, but yes, even you put me to sleep.
Well, that can't put it down. You read that phrase, I couldn't put it down. That hardly ever happens to me, even if it's a really good book. One of the nice things about reading is I can stop anywhere, even in the middle of an exciting scene, because I know it'll be right there when I get back. So it's very rare that I have to, keep reading because I want to find out what happened.
See, I'm kind of the opposite of this. I could not read a book that I hadn't read before as I was trying to go to sleep, because I would just keep reading it and I would be up, and probably until I finished it, honestly. I can read. There are some books that I've read a bunch of times, like Jeeves and Wooster might be an example of that, where I can just pick it up and start reading it anywhere and then maybe drift off reading that. But if it was a new book, no, I would probably, it would wake me up.
It used to be, again, 30 years ago, that if I was reading a thriller or, a book that was fast paced or exciting or whatever, it would keep me up longer. But still, once I close the book and turn out the light or turn off the Kindle, whatever it does, it helps me shut down, no matter what kind of story or book that I'm reading. So, I think I know the answer to this question, but do you make a point of reading books in the genres that you write,
Definitely for me.
Richard?
Definitely, yes. It's actually, uh, again, it's the genre I write in is the one I enjoy reading most. By I don't want to say
Yeah.
coincidence, by design, but also when new books come out, and again, it goes back to like I want to see how the authors approach that subject, especially because I like to play around with mythology, and a lot of those authors do too. So I like to see their spin. How similar was it to mine or not? In fact, when I was writing Perseus kills his grandfather, I think it was just at the time that oh gosh, what the heck is his name? You know, but, it was mostly audio book, but it was a book, and it's the guy who played Jeeves in Jeeves and Wooster when they brought the
Oh,
PBS.
Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry had just done a whole set of Greek mythology, but with sort of modern spins on it. So he narrated it, and it was very different. But I did want to see how he did his take on it. So thank you for that.
My books are sort of mixed genres, so I wouldn't say I read anything as long as it looks interesting. And of course, I've mentioned this before, but I'm often in those Goodreads reading rounds, and I always join, if I can, the general round. And so the books I get assigned, because you get assigned 4 books, and then somebody else gets your book, but they're obviously not the same person. So anyway, so you get these 4 books and you have to read them, and they could be anything. So I'm kind of used to just sort of getting into any kind of book, and as long as it can hold my attention. And for those kind of things, if it doesn't hold my attention, then the review I write isn't going to be as good as if I find it fascinating. But no, I'll read almost any genre. I guess there are a few that I just don't like, anything much to do with sports. Although, hey, I made an exception. I read Kevin Brennan's The Prospect, and that's about
There you go.
So that was okay. So yeah, I'll read almost anything. I don't really like really intensely violent or body horror kind of horror, like anything that's really gross and where that's a big part of the text. I don't want to read that. So yeah, that's about the only thing I'll avoid strenuously.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned that about in the comments about reading the genres that they write in so that they know the genre. And my response was, if I did that, I don't know how many genres I'd have to read because I like to write in different genres. So I think the answer to the question for me is yes, but it's just about any genre because I might try to write in just about any genre. So I'm like you, Audrey. I'll pick up just about any book and give it a try. I mean, there's certain categories that, like romance, and I'm not sure what else, anything with the name Stephen King attached to it these days. But any book, any topic, any type of genre, just about, I will give it a try. So Patrick Prescott had a comment on this post that I thought was fascinating, and I think it applies to me. I was raised reading books, newspapers, comic books, even the label on the bottle of ketchup in front of me while eating French fries. I read and read and read, and because I read, I also write. They go together. I would go out of my mind if all I had was watching TV. Reading keeps me sane. But do you remember sitting at the kitchen table when you were a kid and reading the cereal box? Because it was words in front of you.
Yep. And in Canada, the cereal box is in French and English.
Oh.
So you can
so you can work on
your French while reading the ingredients or whatever.
Yeah. But that's the way he described it is pretty much what my childhood was. We read. That's like one of the key elements of our entertainment when I was growing up was everybody read books, and just kind of nonstop. And if there were words in front of you, you read the words in front of you, no matter what it was. So
My mother had done something which, in retrospect, I think was genius. I like 2 things when I was a kid, especially winter, especially reading a lot. She got me started very early, kind of Dr. Seuss books, whatever, and I loved reading. But then also when summer came, I was like sort of out of the house, active, like, climbing walls. Like, so when I was bad, the way she would punish is she would sit me in front of the TV. And so you just sit here and watch that TV. You can't read, can't play with the toys, can't go out, can't do anything. You sit and watch that TV. And to this day, if something is more than half an hour to 40 minutes, if it's not a movie, because I kind of feel like a movie theater, if it's like a regular TV show, I'm like out of it. I just get uncomfortable. So it worked, but yeah, the TV was when I was a kid. Although there were shows I liked, was at the bottom of the list. Like I said, I think I would go crazy. And in fact, to your thing about falling asleep, I don't fall asleep easily, period, at all. And I do like to read before I go to sleep. But if there's nights I can't sleep, I will go down and watch TV for a while. And that just tires my eyes and my brain stops working and I'll go upstairs. Not a TV.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
That was
amazing that
fun.
TV was your punishment. In our family, TV was a treat.
I know.
Taking our books away would have been punishment.
It worked.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Anything else on this?
I guess I'll just say that it's true. I also read cereal boxes, but it's sort of I can remember reading those that had like cartoon characters and puzzles and all sorts of things like that on them. Yeah. So it was designed to be intriguing.
I don't know if I asked this question last time or we talked about it. Do you need to have something to read? Like if you go to a doctor's office and you're going to be waiting in the waiting room, do you make sure you have something to read?
Well, if I don't anticipate a really long wait, I'll just fiddle with the phone. I don't do much.
What about before the phone? Before
the phone, I would probably just read whatever magazines they had around. But I think since the pandemic, they don't have magazines anymore because they're thought to be like contaminated.
And they don't have office appointments either.
Yeah, well, I still do, but you just turn.
Yeah,
I haven't had a problem with that. But if I'm anticipating having to wait for a long time somewhere and it's uncertain, like you're going somewhere, you're not really sure when, whether there'll be a lineup or whatever, then yeah, I'll take the old e-reader along just in case, because I'd rather be reading and concentrating on that rather than fussing and fretting and looking at how many people are ahead of me and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Richard, Bertold, either of you?
I'll let Richard go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if I know, especially if I got someplace to wait, I'll actually bring a Kindle or something with me. And before Kindle, there would be a book. And when I would plan a day at the beach, I could never go without bringing a book with me.
Right.
As much as I love the beach, I could stare at the ocean for hours. It still is the perfect place to read. So,
yeah.
I'm much the same way. Yes, I bring an e-reader anytime I have to wait for any length of time.
Yeah. I just go to those places and see people just sitting there waiting, and I just don't know how they do it. I got to have something to keep the mind occupied.
Well, nowadays, mostly for people, it's their phone. I don't know what they're doing on it. Once I've checked the weather and my email, that's it. I don't play games on the phone. I don't do sort of things that take a long time. So yeah, the phone is kind of limited for me. If I'm going to be somewhere for a while, I need an actual book on the e-reader or a physical book.
Yeah. Okay. So Richard and Bertold and I had a little bit of an exchange about this on Twitter. And I'll start off by saying that what I'm about to share is actually more about script writing than novel writing, but I think it still applies, and it goes to some conversations we've had before, probably earlier, in terms of how do you write, what's your process, things like that. So this is How to Write a Scene by John August, and there's six questions you're supposed to ask when you write a scene. I'll read all of the first one just to give a sense of it, and then I'll just read the titles for the last five. Ask what needs to happen in this scene. Many screenwriting books will tell you to focus on what the characters want. This is wrong. The characters are not responsible for the story, which, by the way, I see all sorts of writers talk about how the character took the story over. that, so you are responsible for the story. If characters are allowed to control their scenes, most characters would choose to avoid conflict and movies would be crushingly boring. The question is not what could happen or what should happen, it is only what needs to happen. If you wrote an outline, this is the time to look at it. So then the next five, just real quickly, ask what would happen if the scene got omitted. Ask who needs to be in the scene. Ask where could the scene take place. Ask what's the most surprising thing that could happen in the scene. And 6, ask is this a long scene or a short scene? So the question is, what's your process, and do you ask yourself things like that while you're writing, whether it's a scene or something else, some other component of the story? And I'll start, and I'll just say what I said on Twitter. Process? What process? I just start writing. I don't ask questions like this. It's like I the whole idea behind this is so foreign to me. So
Yeah, I agree. In fact, when I read things like that, and I read a lot of those things because they're on the blogs I follow, I kind of think okay, it might work for me to read that stuff and maybe absorb it. And then when I go to actually write something, those tips will sort of be lurking back there and will, help me out somehow. But I cannot consciously write step by step like that. I mean, I kind of know where I'm going. I know what the characters are up to. I know where I want to end up. And so I think of a scene and I just sort of think and write. I don't ask myself questions like that. In fact, if I wanted to shut myself down and induce writer's block, that would be the way to do it, would be to read something like that, sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write the scene now, so let's answer that first question. It just doesn't work for me like that.
It does for me, for one, the example I brought up is an action sequence. I mean, when you have a fight sequence, especially if you ever written one, you need to know where people are, what's happening at different times. You need to then relate that words. And although it's like a very visual medium in your mind, because it's an action sequence, things are happening, you have to figure out where people are, who's in the scene. I do ask those kind of questions. Not number one. Number one is if you remember, rub me the wrong way, because I do like to know if the character is put in that position, what they want to do. But I'm the thing, like, for instance, Bertolt, your story, Inga 1NG4, had some great action scenes in it. And I don't know how you approached it, but for me, when you have multiple things going on, I really do need to sit down and if I had the ability, I draw out a little map. Just to see what's happening in the different time. Now, do I write all that? No. It's because I need to have it formalized and very visual in my mind so I can decide what to write. And not to go too deep, but I did say that years ago, I was experimenting. I was writing actually a novella. And I hit one point where it was extensive fights. One of the first, and every time I tried writing it, I just got I would read it back and it's like I kept losing myself. I didn't know who was doing what. It was kind of uneven. The pacing was off. I was very unhappy with it. So I came up with this process. Again, it's probably one people use when they do a scene, and script writers maybe, I don't know. But the first thing I do is I kind of block it out. So like I set my stage. Where are the people? What happens first? What happens next? Who's in the scene, etc. And then after I get that worked out, the next thing I do is now since everything's going on at once, I know I have to write a whole blog on this, but I look at comic books, what they have done, what the artist has done specifically. You have a script writer, a dialogue writer, writing what's happening, telling you then what's happening. You have to paint that. You have to draw it. You have to make that scene speak, and there are lots of moving parts. So where do you focus? How do you do it? And I do that next. I kind of like say, okay, I kind of let my circle. That's the focus. I'm going to concentrate on what that person's doing. Then that. That's the sequence. Although all three are happening at once, I'll put it that way. And then once that's done, I continue to write it. Now, as I pointed out, all of that doesn't end up on paper, but you know what's happening. And sometimes when you do that. I remember once I was writing a story, it's a short story in a way, and there was an argument back and forth between people who were splitting up. And I didn't quite do it like I was thinking. It wasn't really an action scene, but it was kind of the back of my mind. I had to move into the apartment. It was an apartment. And finally, they ended up at the door. And person A, who wanted out, walked out the door. And person B shut the door. And now that I had that vision in my mind, you know, that show don't tell, it just hit me at that moment. And that question, what would the character do? And I realized I wanted that character, even though that character, he wanted things to continue. He wanted the relationship to continue. After that person walked out the door and the door clicked, he turned the deadbolt. So it's sort of like, now I had in place. If I didn't know where he was, I wouldn't have been able to think at that moment, what would he do? And turning the deadbolt was like, you know what? I'm done too. So without me saying, so I am a very visual thinker. I'm a very visual writer. And when it's a complex thing, I do like to map it out. Now, again, it's not like you may think like it's so, you know, it's a process I have to do each time. It's just when I'm stuck, it is a tool that I'll take out of my bag and I'll work through it. And hopefully, you know, a couple of you have read my books, but you know, I don't have a lot of action, but where it is, I just hope it's keeping the pace properly. And you're not getting lost in what happened. You know, say, wait, what? Who did that? You know, what happened? Anyway, that's my 4 cents.
That's great. That's a great idea.
And Berthold, what's your process? I think you're kind of closer to me.
I'm very much like that. It is probably true that, kind of like Richard said, for specific things, I might start getting real detailed and thinking about how everything works. But again, that would only be in a very specific situation. Like it's usually I'm just like, yeah, I think I basically know what's going to happen in this story, and I write and write and write, and then yeah, if I hit a scene where I'm sort of stuck, then I'll start to go, okay, let's think this through methodically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same about action. Action scenes are hard to write, actually. And if I have like something where some physical action is happening, and you know, like I don't have that many actual fights, but something like that. Yeah, I mean, you really do have to visualize it and think it out. And even, you know, I think I've even at times, you know, gotten up and sort of moved around thinking, okay, if this was, you know, and you kind of, there you are doing something weird and someone comes in, what are you up to? Anyway, but so yeah, there's that. I mean, but that's just specifically for that scene. But I don't sort of ask myself all those questions before I even start on the scene. It's only when I hit that point where I need to visualize the action that I'll actually go through all that detailed stuff.
Yeah.
Again, I not to, but I have to highlight that's only like probably 10% or less of my book, but it's when you get there. Anyway.
I've converted a couple of my stories to script form, and to me it's a completely different way to write a story, because you basically take out, it is about writing scenes. That's what you do. You write a scene and it's dialogue. That's all it is that's it. So I kind of get the emphasis of this thing that I read. The other thing that's interesting is I got this right as I was in the middle of reading a book written by the guy who directed and wrote the screenplay for Bull Durham, which is considered by some to be the greatest sports movie ever. And he wrote a book about the making of the movie. And there's a lot of parallels between him describing writing the screenplay and what that list of things, because he talks about, you know, scenes that are too long, scenes that are too short, scenes that slow the pace down, you know, where's the best place. Like there's one scene that didn't make it into the movie where the Kevin Costner character goes into a whorehouse owned by a friend, and they filmed it and he never liked it, and at the very, very last minute everybody agreed the whorehouse made no sense. It made no sense for Kevin Costner's character to go into that type of business, so they reshot it at the very end and he went somewhere else. The other thing I was going to mention is I was in a writers group for a few years led by an older woman, Zoe Keithley, who was probably 80 at the time, and she used to talk about how she would act out the physical scenes. Like if someone was, sweeping the floor, like Bertold, I know you read The Calling of Mother Adele. It opens, I think, with one of the students, one of the children, or a maid, somebody mopping a floor. She would act out mopping a floor so she could describe it properly. The other thing she did in this group that I wish I could stop and force myself to do was the second half of that, whenever we got together, would be filled with a writing exercise. And typically what she would say is, okay, close your eyes, put yourself into a scene, put yourself into a place. And then she would walk through, identify what's happening in that scene, who's in the scene, what's in the scene. And one of the things she would do is, is there, what do you hear there? What do you smell there? And identify one thing that's there that doesn't belong there. And those types of things really helped flesh scenes out, or however you want to describe it. There were things that I did in the dime that I never would have come up with without stopping and doing those kinds of things. So while I don't do it, I know I should do it, and I could probably produce better stories if I was able to stop and think about some of those elements rather than just writing it without really thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think in just about any scene, you know how you can over describe things. Well, I figured out you don't have to describe everything, but if you describe some specific detail quite vividly, that sort of represents the setting or what's going on better than if you have descriptions of a whole bunch of stuff. So, like if you want to convey that a room is shabby, maybe you just mention, instead of saying the couch was worn and saggy, the wallpaper was peeling and blah, 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 you just mention that there was a whole lot of fuzzballs on the floor or something. Just a couple details that are telling, sink in and it'll kind of show the reader that what kind of thing this is. And they can supply the details themselves if they want, about other things. So, yeah.
Moldy smell tells you, volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, smell would be good in a situation like that.
Yeah. Do you write your stories from essentially beginning to end, or do you jump around, or?
I used to, let's see, when I was working and I was writing my first novel, and I was just totally obsessed with it. Sometimes I'd have an idea for a scene, like at work, and so I'd make a few notes, right? I'd write a little mini version of that scene, even though I wasn't quite there yet, and then I'd work it into the main thing later. But no, I usually go, right from start to finish. And now, subsequently, I may take stuff out or put other stuff in, or even move things around. But yeah, when I'm working on the first draft, I just kind of start at the beginning and keep going to the end.
Richard, how about you?
I start at the start, but then, I do jump around after. If something, as I'm working through, occurs to me, or usually it's when you're right, when there's somewhere else, you're at work, wherever, something hits me, I get inspired. I don't want to lose that. And so I'll start and refocus on that particular chapter. Now, I just have like a general outline when I start, a general outline where I'm starting, where I'm going to end up. A lot of stuff is fuzzy, but I know what the goals are. So, and then I'll bounce around. It also helps me, I think, not get that sort of writer's block thing when you get stuck. I do suggest to people, look, you're at point A and you got to get to point C, and you can't figure it out. Well, that's the thing. Start maybe writing more about point C, and then hopefully the two. So,
yeah.
I alluded to this a little bit on Twitter, that I was trying writing something in a very different way than I've done before. And one of the things about that is I'm trying to write it completely backwards. I'm starting with the last chapter and working my way back. We'll see if it actually works or not.
Memento.
Yeah, exactly.
You should publish it in that order.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the Amazon short story thing? Not short story, the episodic thing they have now. Bella.
Yeah, Bella.
Do it on there backwards.
I have a story that's on the back burner that I want to do something like that with. That basically the last chapter is the first, and then it kind of, just like Memento. Speaking of which, and I think I might have brought this up before, how as a writer do you feel about a reader reading the last chapter first?
You're talking to someone who titled his last book "Perseus Kills His Grandfather," which is the end scene. I don't honestly, I don't mind that. Reader,
Okay.
reader, do what you want, whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they want to, sure, but I would assume it will make no sense. So I guess I don't know why you would do that, but I guess, sure.
Yeah, I've not really thought about it. I guess I figure if somebody wants to do that, you can't stop them, right? They're reading away.
Well, I have
somewhere.
a
As long as
family
they're reading your book, it's great. So yeah.
Yes, that's true. I have a family member who does that, and whenever it comes up, like I've told her, if you read any of my books, you can't do that. You have to read it from beginning to end. And if you're unwilling to agree to that condition, then don't read my books. But it's just I just tell her, if the writer wanted you to read the last chapter first, he or she would have put it first.
The next time you give that relative one of your books as a present, remove the last chapter, cut it out, and then give that as a follow-up afterwards, nicely bowed.
Yeah, you get it when you've told me that you've read it and you passed a quiz to confirm that you read it.
Well, that's a good idea. I read a book recently on one of the Goodreads reading rounds that started out with really detailed directions by the author on how
to read
the order you could read this in, because he had it set up so you could. It sort of had all these different characters, and he took them from like the 1960s to 2019, and so you could read the whole thing for the one person, and then go to the next guy, or you could go along chronologically among all 6 of them. And so he had like paragraphs and paragraphs, and you could do this or you could do that. I just read it straight through as the text was, and I was fine with that. But yeah, I'm not really into that sort of writing, I have to say.
Yeah, sounds too complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
So we have less than a minute left. Anything else on any of these topics we've talked about today? Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and as we say, keep writing, keep reading too.